Hello and welcome to this live event here at EU Green Week in Brussels. My name is Jeremy Wilks, science correspondent for Euronews, and we're asking whether it's time to wise up about water, pollution, climate change, droughts and floods. All of those are major concerns for Europeans, and we're going to be taking your questions and putting them to the panel here to discuss how we manage this transition and become smarter in our use of water. Let me introduce the panelists. I'm pleased to welcome Florika Fink-Hooijer, is the Director-General for Environment at the European Commission. Thanks for being with us. Henk Ovink, the Executive Director for the Global Commission on the Economics of Water. Thanks very much for being with us. And Arnaud Valleteau, the CEO of Veolia Water Technologies. Thanks very much for being with us on this panel. We've got a great set of questions that we've had from our audience coming in. Let's get started with the polling that recently came out from the European Commission, which found that pollution was the #1 concern for Europeans. In fact, 69% of them said that that was what they were worried about when it came to water. Florika, are Europeans right to be concerned about water quality and about pollution?
I think every citizen is always concerned and should be concerned about the health and the well-being and also the economic state. That's perfectly right. Now, when I compare it to the global situation, we are a little bit privileged. Globally, we have roughly 50% of wastewater that is really going untreated into the rivers. And there I'm not talking only about household wastewater, but also industrial wastewater and so on. So when you now look at the European Union, we have a very solid, very wide framework of laws. We just not only had yesterday or today the Eurobarometer coming out, we also had the report on the basin water, for instance. We have really seen that because of the Basin Water Directive, you are now, when I compare it to my childhood, you can go and swim in certain areas, and we have an app, and you can look whether or not you can safely, without any exposure to diseases, swim because of bacteria or non-bacteria. We have the Drinking Water Directive, we have the Urban Wastewater Directive, and we have upped these in order to also meet the new concerns, because there are new concerns due to microplastics, new types of pollutants that enter the water. We are highly industrialized. Obviously, there are new challenges, and we have to adapt our legislation to these new challenges.
Because what you're talking about is kind of we're cleaning up from the 20th century, but now we've got 21st century concerns as well. Henk, are Europeans right to be concerned about pollution?
Yes, they are. And also in the context of the global levels, if you see where we are at in our advanced society, you could say, we should be concerned. Water affects our health, our human health, our health for our kids that we want to bring up in a healthy environment, but also health for our food systems and the combination with industrialization, pollution, forever chemicals, medicines in our water, plastics and microplastics.
The image in our minds is there's all kinds of junk in our water. Is that actually true, though, Arnaud?
And the salinity with it.
It really depends what we want to do with the water. In fact, basically what is inside our water is what we are rejecting into this water. So basically it's mostly for me how we are going to manage it as citizens, as industries, as a whole. How do we want to manage this water and make sure that we keep safe water for our citizens, for our children, and we keep sufficient water for our economy and our business to run. So that's really what is at stake for me.
We've got some fine Brussels tap water there. Should I be worried about that?
No. I don't think so. No. I guess.
But is there stuff in there that you'd actually ultimately like to take out, Henk?
Yeah, so there's you have to really distinct the water that's coming from your tap and the surface water and your groundwater.
Exactly.
Totally different conditions there. I think we're very good with technology and regulation to really protect our citizens for drinking pollutants. But it doesn't mean that our environment is not at risk. And with that, at a certain point, also your drinking water. But right now, I should not be concerned about the water I drink because we have regulations in place, European and per country.
For the last few decades, there's a ton of rules that have come in.
And this is one of the goods which is the most controlled in terms of sanitaries and health. It's the most controlled goods that you
But I
are
have to
eating
say
and drinking.
We, as I said in the beginning, we have to adapt, right? Because now just for the drinking water, I mean, we are really super proud, and I think also as Europeans, we should be very proud of having these safe drinking waters. That is a huge step and a huge guarantee for us. But now we have brought forward, for instance, a revision of the Drinking Water Directive, so as to address, for instance, PFAS and other stuff. And we have now upped the conditions for member states so as to clean their waters. Because we are exposed to new things. As I said, bathing water was about bacteria. And that's very important. And that's what we looked at in the beginning. Now we will have to discuss also as globally, I mean, perhaps I should say that we look at Europe, but our waterways, everything is interlinked. We get, I mean, we might pollute here rivers or fresh water, and you said quite rightly we have the groundwater, the surface water, and other types of like drinking water. But it's a global system as well, so we also have to think about that. So we do what we can here to also reassure our citizen, but we also have to act globally. So,
let me bring in a question that we got from one of our audience members, actually, because I think that it's helpful to hear different voices in the conversation. This one comes from Peter Elson, who's the founder of Canal It Up. He actually campaigns for water quality here in Brussels. This is his question. He is asking that it looks like cities around Europe need a really good reason before they start investing ambitiously in water quality. They need to basically get sued or have some major sporting event in order for them to actually say, let's clean up our water. I don't mean the drinking water, I mean the water in their waterways. What would be a reason in Brussels for everybody to get behind a kind of a good water quality story? And he's particularly concerned about sewage going into the waterways, the rivers, etc., which is to do with the way that the drainage system is set up. Arnaud, can you quickly kind of sketch out how that works? Because basically when it rains very heavily, you get these overflows, right?
Yeah, it really depends on the way the drainage system was set up. You have cities where you have combined sewer system when you are getting water from households and wastewater from households, and also rainy water, which are combined. And then when it's raining too much, then yes, you have overflows.
And that happens in Brussels today.
That might happen in Brussels today. And those overflows, then the question is, how are you able to treat them? Or which quantity of water are you able to treat? Because what is interesting with rainwater is treating the first stage of the rainwater, which is the heavy polluted water, that when you are on the street and the water which is washing the streets. But then after that, you have somehow clean water to discharge. So this is finding the right proportion between that.
It isn't like that everywhere, though, Henk, right?
No, it's not like everywhere. But in the combination of what we see happening, events become more extreme. So we have longer periods of drought and more heat, and that means water quality actually goes down because the water quantity goes down, and with heat, water quality goes down.
Even here in Brussels, that can happen.
Also here in Brussels, the city is heating up. In the combination of these massive cloudbursts, all of a sudden putting so much pressure on a system that it starts to burst. And you have to rethink that if you combine storm water with sewage water and your system in a city that is a hardened surface like here, you always have a problem. So you have to think about nature-based type of solutions where you start to capture that water before it ends up in your sewage system. That also help you reduce temperature, heat island effects.
Separate them.
No, do not just separate them, because these massive events, and that is what we've seen around the world, these massive events are so extreme. If you would build infrastructure for that, it's not used for 99% of the day, and the costs that come with it also take up way too much space. So the solution lies in nature, in greening your city, that you're able to actually mitigate the risk of these extremes. You get absorbing capacity, and what you then have left over, that is what you can separate. You have normal quantities of being able to separate that. And there are many examples from around the world, especially from the global south, where in cities that are expanding, they're greening, they're separating stormwater and sewage water, and it helps reduce risks, but also creates a lot of quality. There are a lot of added values with that.
Florika?
I would say that there are many cities, also in Europe, who are doing this. I mean, you mentioned the nature-based solutions. It's like greening the roofs. Not soiling, not sealing the soil and things like that. There are many, many, many solutions. I think nature-based solutions clearly are there, and we have to scale them up. I would, in any case, say we have to double nature because it's much cheaper than anything else, and it is also having very positive side effects for citizens, for the well-being, including mental well-being.
And his question is, why is that not happening now?
But
then?
Can I say something? I think one is the infrastructure. I mean, it's clear that we are now having extreme weather events for which our infrastructure is not made. Yes, so we have to look at other solutions and also solutions that can be scaled up easily and without too much cost. I would still like to go back to the urban wastewater treatment because ultimately this is where we have to make sure that we also have the capacity. So we were talking about cost now with the urban wastewater treatment directive. We were expanding it exactly because we realized its cost. So some member states said, oh, you now go for smaller agglomerations, because before it was big agglomerations, but the smaller ones where you had, for instance, tourists, but then the sewage water was just leaked into the sea, were perhaps under the radar because they were not on the threshold where you have to have urban wastewater treatment installations. So that has been changed, and we were proposing it in order to really capture a whole raster range. Now, there are costs, so then you have to go, where's the pollution? The pollution is at source, and therefore we have EPR systems, so extended producer responsibilities, fees, which then the member state can channel to the urban wastewater treatment utilities so that they can, treat differently. It's quite complex. You have to not just look at one thing.
What motivates everybody to make these expenses? That's what he's talking about.
When I will give you the example of Copenhagen.
Copenhagen,
there have been a huge work done with the city of Copenhagen, and Veolia has participated to this work in order to give back the harbour clean water where people can swim, where we have created spaces for the people to enjoy.
Even been tempted to swim in it myself.
There is a race everywhere, every year, end of August, that is organized in order to celebrate this achievement. It has been done by several things. It has been done by looking at the flows, putting digital solution as well in order to manage the flow during those periods of hard rain and no rain, in order to manage properly the flow. And
so that's kind of forecasting that the problem's coming.
Forecasting, digital solution also in order to optimize the investment that needs to be done in terms of retention, in terms of overflow treatment, and nature-based solutions. So in fact, it's a combination of all that, and we need to make it, I would say, acceptable, and even more something which is needed by the citizen, which is it's giving them something back that they could enjoy.
Well,
this is really
what tips them into that? Was there a particular moment that made them say, we need to fix this? Because this is what he's getting to the root of. Because this is one campaigner who's trying to make a difference.
I can give you an example from Belgium, which really made people change. That was the big floods.
3 years ago.
Yeah.
2 years, 3 years ago.
3 years ago.
I really was very pleased that I was in Wallonia not so long ago, and they handed over to me a check of representing 1 million trees that had been planted after the flood, and also hectares of hedges. A nature-based solution in order to capture, to keep the soil,
slow down the water.
Slow down the water. It's really a nature-based solutions against disaster risk, right? And action as prevention, but also in the floods. So that was, unfortunately, as often the case, a catastrophe, a disaster, triggering people to rethink. But one also has to acknowledge they are doing that. And I mean, we have, by the way, also this 3 billion trees planting action. So I found that a good example in Copenhagen, Vienna. There are many cities who are doing this. Because ultimately what you're saying, why would you do this? Yes, we talk here about cost, but these are part of like one-off cost, I mean, the installation cost. What about the cost of the disasters? What about the cost of diseases?
Well, you've got to get through to politicians about that.
Yeah,
you spend your time doing that and trying to pitch them this and say you spend this much up front and you won't have this if that happens.
No, but I think combining actually the two. there is always a suite of interventions that you have to take. So there's no silver bullet. Forget about it. The opportunity with a suite of interventions is that you can connect them to local interests. Everyone has something to gain. And that's actually, in the context of politicians and a political buy-in of more increased opportunity, is where you can say, if this suite of interventions helps you to understand risks, manage them, and create added value, there's something in it for all of us.
The kind of greening space, urban spaces story.
Yeah, but
that
also
one
the
sells,
technology,
right?
and that you have water that you can drink and that you can celebrate, and in schools. That is one. The other is learning from those disasters is not only an opportunity, it's a responsibility. It's a societal responsibility. I chaired for this Flemish government the international panel that advised the Flemish government post the floods on what to do. And the interesting part was that we were able to combine not looking at too much water, but also at not enough water and water quality, because this is what you immediately dive into. If you look at it holistically, systemically, you start to identify that climate, environment, but also the economy are all linked by the quality of water, the availability of water, and the stresses on that. And I think the combination of that shows that the suite of interventions really taps into all the interest a society can bring. And that leads to, you can only solve this and deal with this if you bring in coalitions. Coalitions across society. There's no single solution, but there's also no single entity that can do this alone. And I think this goes beyond public-private partnership. This is really about just partnerships, just water partnerships, where you bring in citizen-led, community-led, private sector-led, government-led, coalitions of the willing that are able to produce solutions that you are able to scale. And then you set a standard. I think that's a little bit almost what Arnaud tried to say, is that if this holistic approach becomes the ambition and the standard, this is what we then can comply with the rules that we bring together here in Brussels to say, okay, this is the ambition for our continent, for the safety and health for our citizens, but also for our economies.
And all of us want to have great quality water. You've already mentioned PFAS. We know that's one of the things out there, these kind of forever chemicals, 10,000 odd of these things that seem to be everywhere, not just in the water. But you've also got antibiotics, you've got hormones, you've got industrial chemicals, you've got cyanotoxins, you've got nanomaterials. A real smorgasbord of stuff that I don't really want in my water. Technically, Arnaud, can you clean those things out? I mean, before we start making rules and everything, can you actually get rid of them?
I mean, technically, we need to see things in different stages. The first one is to be able to monitor and to measure. That's the first thing that we need to do, and that's what's coming on with PFAS. We are discovering PFAS every year, every day, measuring
because we're doing more monitoring.
Because we are doing more monitoring. So doing more monitoring is getting to know better what's inside our water, what's inside our environment, because I must insist, what we find in our water is what comes from our environment. There is nothing which is created within the water. We need to be clear about that. And then, while we are measuring, we have the technologies to remove this from the water. Then we will have to treat this pollution, but the technologies to remove this from water and to provide safe water to citizens are existing. They are in place. We are dealing with that every day on our contract.
Are they deployed now? Are there places in Europe?
They are deployed step by step because, as I've said, we need to monitor. We have to have the right indicators to follow the performance of what we are going to do. The directive are pushing, and the regulatory framework is pushing for that. Right? And that's really a good news. That's the regulation is pushing for that.
Well, at the moment there are discussions about PFAS. Can you kind of update us on that, the situation at the moment?
I will in a second, but I just wanted to say this is why there is also a beauty in regulating it and making member states agree on the necessity. And once the co-legislators have done so, then it will be implemented. And we have done so with the Drinking Water Directive, where we have said PFAS has to be really phased out by 26, or sorted out and monitored. And we're now giving guidance on how, with industry, how to do this and how to help member states on that. We had... Also now we have a proposal which is still not yet approved, but I hope it will, on water pollutants in surface water and groundwater, because we have to look at both, where we really look at the new substances of concern which are now more and more emerging, and we have to see. Now on the PFAS directly, we had 5 states who were asking our chemical agency, the ECHA, about a ban. And that was, I think it was Denmark, it was Sweden, it was Germany, it was Netherlands, and Norway. And they have put that request forward. Now, ECHA is an independent agency. They are analyzing it. They have made a consultation where many have reacted and said, well, I need PFAS because of my industrial processes. Others were said, oh, but here I have already alternatives for it. So based on that, ECHA will make its opinion. Then the opinion comes to the Commission. Commission will have to decide. That is only foreseen for next year. So it's a very lengthy process. Theoretically, if we had perhaps a new legislation, we could have perhaps simplified that. But this is how it has to, how it will be happening. Interestingly, we just had this Eurobarometer where you were referring to. And many citizens, when we asked them about pollutants and so on, and PFAS, they didn't know what PFAS are.
No.
The moment, however, it was explained, they were super concerned.
Yeah.
Now, in all fairness, I also have to say...
I think that would apply to me, to be honest.
Yeah, I
and a lot of my
that.
colleagues
yes,
as well.
Yes, and we all learn, about things. But in like PFAS, there are many PFAS, right? It's not just one. And we have also banned one or two, and also internationally, but then there are others. Now, our idea is how to stimulate innovation so that we go on alternatives, phase it out and replace it. And I think it's possible, but we have to see, and I want to be very transparent here about it. We also have issued just a communication on essential uses. Essential uses where also when you look at PFAS, as I said, you have a range of it. Some we have alternatives, others we might have alternatives, and there are some where for the moment we don't. And when you think about defense, when you think about certain
medical devices,
medical devices, I think we also have to accept, but then in a contained environment and with the conditions that we know, that there are essential uses that we also have to accept. But then comes the filtering out, again, important, and the way it is used. But that's where we also have to see the balancing. But many can hopefully and be stimulated into innovation to be replaced.
Let's move on and talk about agriculture. You had some big protests here in Brussels and other parts of Europe as well by farmers earlier this year. We know that was politically a pretty hot topic. We've had questions on this where people talk about intensive agriculture and to what extent it pollutes waterways, etc. And lots of our viewers are concerned about that. We had a question from Jerry McAvilly from Friends of the Earth in Ireland asking how can EU agricultural policy be reformed to support farmers who are improving water quality and delivering environmental benefits. Henk, first off, you come from the Netherlands, where there's a lot of intensive farming. Is this really something that everybody should be concerned about? Are there good solutions to try and fix things? And how do you encourage the farmers who are doing a good job?
Yeah, we should be worried about this. Second, we have to be very careful that we focus very much on a farmer pollutes, and so we'll put in a measure against it. When we look at agriculture in Europe, and also in the Netherlands, and food at large, which is actually what you have to look at, what is the economic perspective that would incentivize a single farmer and a whole industry to change course? So I think that's a totally different debate. The fact that we have a lot of pollution coming from the agriculture and the industry is, to the point of Florika before, we have to treat our pollution at the source. Not, of course, we have to make sure that everything is in place to protect our environment and our citizens for that pollution that ends up. But it shouldn't happen. It should not enter in. And then to that point, every farmer knows. I come from a farmer. My mother comes from a farmer family. My late mother. So every farmer knows that an unhealthy environment will deliver unhealthy stuff. So at a certain point, there's a cost to exactly that pollutant. So making the connection again between what you produce and what you put back into the environment is going to be of critical importance. But yes, in the intensity of pollutants in our environment that are related to our industry, our economy and our modeling, and also for our food sector, beyond a single farmer are of critical importance. But what you should not do is say, single out the farmer, say you're to blame. The single farmer is not to blame for the pollutants then to end up in our environment. It's a system around it that we really have to change.
That's the thing. I've talked to agriculture experts who are saying, look, the farmers are water users, but they're also producers of food, of course, and so it's a whole system. What's the industry point of view on this?
I mean, on this, we are speaking about treating wastewater. Wastewater, and especially wastewater coming from food industry, is very valuable. And this is something we should not forget. We are trying to remove things from the wastewater so that it does not affect our environment, but the things that we are removing are valuable. We can create energy. We can create energy with the pollution we are moving away, and the new urban drainage initiative is pushing for that, for more energy produced by wastewater. We can produce also fertilizer. So there is a lot of things that can come from this wastewater, even clean water for reutilization of water. So this is really something we should take a look holistically on that and find a positive way of addressing the topic.
The best shouldn't be there. Florika, can I bring you in? How do we encourage the best farmers to do the great job?
Yeah, because I think globally, 70% of the water is abstracted for farming globally, right? Yeah. It's not so different.
It's a huge demand, right?
It's a huge demand. Because for food and for food production, right? You're absolutely right, Henk, for food production. But now we have to see, here it is raining now a lot, and we have perhaps too much water at the moment. But globally we see, and that is also true for Europe, we will have facing more and more drought, right? So the idea of how to reuse water in irrigation for farming is quite important. But then you have the farmer who wants to produce a good product, but then also the consumer. And by the way, I would really like to stress, for farmer is working with nature, not against nature, because farmers, that's literally then, nature is their natural capital. So of course they're not destroying it, they want to hand it over. But if I now look at the reuse of irrigation in farming land, we have put forward a regulation which is now in place, how to do this in a way that the consumer is reassured. The conditions that the consumer would say, I buy this product, the strawberries, knowing that this would be safe, let's say, because otherwise they will not, and the farmers will not have any business. The interesting part was, initially it was designed as it's a voluntary proposal, but if you do it, you have to do it in these conditions. But it's voluntary if you want to do it, the reuse of water in irrigation for farmland. Now, many countries said, oh, this is for the south, I don't need that. Right. Now, almost everybody says, oh, I need that. I need that more and more. So it was right to go into this, because water is so precious. I mean, whether it's rainwater that you capture, whether it's a water that you reuse, water efficiency first is really what we have to think in all our approaches. And we have to think holistically. And there you can do a lot. And by the way, if I may say so, also a lot of third countries who have been faced perhaps with drought earlier on, they have systems, and we can also learn from each other there. So I think we have also technologies very much.
Hank, do you think that kind of blanket bans and things are the way to try and make changes, particularly on the agriculture systems? So those sorts of things work? How do you encourage the best practices to happen? Is it actually by stopping what you don't want, or is it by trying to price the positives a bit better? How do you make it work?
It's always a mix. But I think when we look at food and food production around the world, we really need almost a revolution. The way we are producing food for our growing societies, the food demand is only going up. At large.
Which means the water demand is going up.
Water demand is doubling until 2030. So that means that with our population growth comes an economic growth that is unprecedented. So we live in a planet where water is becoming more scarce, more polluted, more saline, and at the same time demand is going up. And especially you see this year. But if you focus on a single farmer in that system, you won't fix it. It demands a different way how we think about nutrients, how we think about food at large, how we want to consume in the combination of environmental issues and climate-related issues. So I think that is key. It's possible. I also think the European Union at one, but Europe at large actually is an amazing opportunity. We have such a concentration of industry, of capital, of people and political will, that if we are able to show here what this food transition means, we become an example. If we don't do it here, we continue to stay this large blocker, and not only from a pollutant perspective that then, the Veolias of the world will all take it out, but it started to end up, and it's in our environment before it it's not ending up in our drinking water. So it's still a major challenge. We have to continue to treat this at the source and show that there's an alternative here. And if we stay behind as Europe, we're going to pollute our future generations and our undermine our economy. To that point, what Florika said, extremes becoming more extreme. When the Ukraine war broke out, we were in our 6th year of drought. There was a water deficit, still is, in the Netherlands, a country almost a third below sea level, let alone the other countries. 25% of energy production in Europe is one-on-one dependent on the availability of water. That was way more than our dependency on Russian gas. So the vulnerability to our system is key. So food, industry are a critical component because they can be a lever into the transition that we need when we think about water use. Then last, to this point, you talked about irrigation. Water comes from the sky. We always, we never think about where it comes from. So this is this amazing thing, which is water. That's why I'm so passionate about, is that we think it comes somewhere from the ocean. 60% of the rain from the sky comes from land. That land, if we look at Europe, is under threat. So we pollute it. Our biodiversity is in decline. So land use policy is, and so therefore economic development are critically linked to the fact that we're depending on irrigation for our food system.
There you're also talking about the water cycle.
Yes.
And we know that overarching all of this is climate change, which isn't going to go away as a problem, no matter how hard we try. It's not going away. And we have got to the point where people are saying we've broken the water cycle.
Well, we dented it.
We dented it.
Massively.
What do we do? What's the I mean, you can't regulate your way out of that one.
Well, you can.
I think
it's not a regulation.
It's not a regulation, but I would already start by saying, if you only look at climate change, which is very abstract, the first thing is now to stabilize global warming. And if
which
we do that,
we're doing a particularly bad job of doing at the moment.
Yeah, but I would like to come back on nature-based solutions and the doubling of nature, because when we talked just a moment ago on the agriculture cycle, and we have a whole cycle of water. We have the blue water, we have the green water, which are the forest, the soil, and everything else. But we have the wastewater, the grey water. We have other types of water which we can also put together on how we can use it better, more efficiently. But if you look at the farmer, I'm very grateful that you mentioned that. Looking at crop rotation, putting aside land, putting certain coverage, agroforestry. There are certain ways also where a farmer, and they are doing that very well, in order to capture more the moisture in the soil, which is basically the most productive thing that they have. And so we need, I like very much what Henk said, we need a systemic but very integrated approach.
Right.
And we cannot just look at one or the other. And clearly, restoration of nature, that might be all types of ecosystems. That can be the rivers, it can be the urban landscape, it can be the forest landscape, wetlands, peatlands, equally important, not just for climate change,
those things
but
are
for
happening. I see them
biodiversity.
happening. I mean, I go and report on these things as well, and I see how they work. Small scale, they're local solutions for kind of local situations as well. Arnaud, I'm wondering, from an industry point of view, you hear in Brussels people talk about nature-based solutions all of the time, which can be abstract until you walk on the ground and you say, okay, you widened the river, you slowed down the water, etc., etc. What do they do for you? Do they actually make your job as a water company easier?
No, we are using them already. We are using them already in Spain, in Alicante. We have rebuilt a park in order to absorb, I would say, rainwater and things like that. So it's combining, in fact, as we were speaking about coalition, it's also how we can combine nature-based solutions when they are needed, where we need to use them. Nature-based solutions are using space. How much space are we ready to dedicate those nature-based solutions. This is
Well, in
also
some places there isn't enough space for
there
it.
is enough space, but we need to recreate them. Then once again, it's a local decision, I would say. We really need to see water as a local topic. There is a global impact, but really it's a local topic. You have cities which are lacking water, cities which are having an excess of water, and you won't deal with them with one solution. As you say, there is no silver bullet.
But Henk, how can you say there isn't space? I mean, when you go to some of the places that have been flooded,
I would say a couple of things.
there wasn't space.
Every time we try to say it's local and not global, there's a whole debate out. I think it's every time what we're saying, it's everything. And being able to continue to understand that we need everyone, we need everything, and it's at all scales. But within that, we can create opportunities that are, are more or less within a boundary that you can.
With climate change, you're going to have more heavy rain. You're going to have.
As an example,
I come from a part of the world where you've got lots of towns and villages in small river valleys. So those people who were never flooded in the past,
so
now they may get flooded. You can't say there's space for them to move. They're going to have to get out of their house.
No, so after the flood here in Belgium, I had the honor to chair this task force. With the task force, we came up with a report, Resilient Waterlands. That report is already being implemented. So we work with farmer communities in those stream capacities. It's a coalition of partners where the farmers start to reinvent how they use the land to capture the water, where a community is involved. It's at a smaller scale, but what you see is because it's on the national level embedded in a strategy, every of those smaller scale opportunities contribute to a larger effort. So, yes, you can. There is, even in Flanders, which Belgium, if we always compare it, I was Director-General for Planning in the Netherlands at a certain point. If we compare the Netherlands and Belgium, Belgium was always a scattered planning way of developing urbanization. So you would find a house or industrial everywhere. There's literally less space here. But even here in Flanders, it's possible to find that space. It's possible in England and across Europe and around the world. Then to the point to cost. No, I'm going to put the nature-based solutions. We're just implemented a new program in Chennai in India, using water as a lever for resiliency, equity, and sustainability. On the bankability side, investment costs are less than 2/3 of harder infrastructure. On maintenance and operations, it's not even half. And we cut carbon with 80%. So there is a business case, and we crowd in private technology for nature-based solutions, cleaning stormwater and sewage water and wastewater on site in an environment that is a playground that really is owned by a community and can be scaled. So there are many examples around the world, in the global south and here in Europe, that need that scale and that capacity behind it, that push that comes from a societal coalition, but also with political will and finance and private sector contributions.
Go on quickly. That example showed is, I think it's not right if we start from, I look at trade-offs. Right. I say, oh, there's not enough space, so when you want me to move. No, you have to think of, why can I not go for win-win solutions? How can I not use, change the floodplains, but also go for agricultural use and other things in urban planning? So I think, unfortunately, the world has become more complex. True. But that means also we have to think a bit more in a more broader systemic way. And if we do so, I think we can really go for solutions. What I like to really project is, it's not that it is impossible, and that's why I'm also a little bit allergic of saying, oh, it's just climate change, because that is deresponsibilizing. I mean, you can do yourself something on nature degradation. You can do yourself something on pollution. So I think we have to see it a little bit more on a, how can we go for solutions?
One of the things
I've
found, though, is that there's actually a lack of monitoring. There's a lack of data. We live in the age of data, but in fact, and you were mentioning this earlier, we don't really know very much about our groundwater. We don't really know about our water budget. We're not really getting a lot of measurements from deep underground. This is what experts have been telling me, so we don't really know an awful lot.
Well, actually, if you would read the report of the European Environmental Agency, which has to report, because we have made these regulations so that they have to report. You have satellite imagery and everything else.
But that's surface, it's not deep groundwater.
Well, it's an interesting report from 2020 from the World Bank, and it's called Quality Unknown, so it implies that we don't know. But the report actually shows that we know.
But deep groundwater monitoring, are we doing that?
Is that do we really want to tap to those deep
No, we should
not.
water?
That's another issue.
But Henk was talking about rising demand, and that's where you get it from at the moment, isn't it? You can't
Be
get it.
very I totally agree. Be very careful with your aquifers.
I think none of us would do this.
If you rob the bank, forget about that somebody is putting
but
it back.
currently we are doing a bit of bank robbing, aren't we?
Yeah, we are doing that quite a bit, but we have to be very careful with the aquifers.
Very careful regarding that. So really, we need to know better our aquifer and where the water is coming from. And once again, I'm not trying to opposite a local and a global approach. It's both that we need. There is a big water cycle and there is the small one around the cities, and that's those both water cycles that today we are trying to reconciliate. Because this is really what is at stake right now. We were saying before there is the small one, the big one. No, we are trying to put them together, and we need to know better what's going on, but we need to know better what's going on in order to make sure that we are not doing mistakes that we would have done in the past. Considering water as an infinite resource is not working, because we are speaking not about water but about fresh water. I mean, this is really what we need to be speaking of. It's fresh water, because water is water, and the water cycle will recreate water. But what kind of water do we want to have? We want to have fresh water and water of quality. So really, knowing those deep aquifers is something good for science, but should not allow us to say we can tap in unknown resources.
But that's what they do in America, right?
Because we need to understand better, but maybe because tapping in those resources is still cheaper than, and it's all come back because it's still cheaper than reusing. It's still cheaper than changing our habits, than reducing our consumption. And this is where we need to have
about those things as well. I want to bring another question though.
You also have technological situation. I mean, we now talked a lot about nature-based solutions because I think we're all passionate about it. But you also have technical solutions, and you have to do this. And I mean, even simple things like capturing the rainwater for your toilet flushing, right? This is also a technical solution, but it's very simple. But you also have, let's say the words desalination. Yes, of course, we will have to go into that as well at a certain moment, especially if we know that we're going into very drought-prone. I mean, some parts of Europe become very, very.
Before I do want to talk about desalination, but can I just bring in another question that we had, which was an unusual idea to me, honestly, when I heard it, but it was a question we had from Charlene Alberici, who is from something called the Fluctuations Festival. And this is her question. She wants to know whether to preserve water and achieve our climate objectives by 2030, we should equip our rivers, our seas and our oceans with a specific legal status. So a kind of legal protection for your rivers. Not quite sure what that would be, Henk. What are we talking about here?
There are countries around the world that are not only considering that, but are actually doing that. Dominican Republic already had nature in their constitution to give it a right, and they're working on including rivers as a specific element of that, although rivers are already part of that whole biodiversity construct. Again, I think it is amazing giving a river a right and having it being protected and bringing a legal perspective.
But then you have to enforce it as well.
Yeah, so it's always so I think if you work at the source where it starts, it's always better than when you put in. Yes, we have to put in these constructs of governance, of capacity, of regulations to make sure that we know. These should be informed by science and not by pollution. You could almost say. Right. We want a future that is better than the current situation of our environment.
Doing that, does it fix problems?
Yeah, it helps because look at in the Netherlands, we had a court case against our government saying that the government was not doing enough to achieve the promise of and the commitment of the Paris Agreement. We went all the way up to the highest court. Urgenda, the NGO who led that court case, got right, and the government complies. So yes, law is important. I think it's important.
real legal cases when things go wrong.
What is helpful in acknowledging natural systems in the context of law is you not only look at the environment, you also look at the culture. We learn a lot from indigenous cultures from around the world, but we also learn a lot about frontline communities. Also here, again, in a situation like in Germany and Belgium where the flood really hit 3 years ago, learning from the people that really suffered and understand what risk is almost on a daily basis helps inform what you put in place to prevent that risk from happening. So I think the combination of nature and culture in the context of how we regulate, but also how we govern and organize, and in that sense, how we start to implement solutions that are the alternative, because the existing ones replicating, it doesn't work.
But I think can I bring you in on this one from industry point of view?
Really, the point is raising awareness. All this question about giving a reverse body a legal entity, it's really raising awareness on how much we have an impact on them, and how much we, on the way we are developing and we are harming those natural resources. So the question for me is much more raising awareness, putting things in action, making the right governance around those, the water resources globally, locally, the right level of governance, and collaboration and cooperation around. This is really, for me, what is about while pushing such kind of topics, and this is really what is needed.
Can we move on, because we're going to start running out of time? I want to go back to
say something,
go on quickly.
I think as a lawyer I'm quite fascinated by the right to nature and right of nature and so on, and that is true that it was creating, especially speaking for and then something nature who has no voice. So I think in India as well, in some other countries, but actually also in Europe we have had, and we do have Professor Vincente here at the Green Week later on, and she was advocating very much and succeeding that in Spain the Mar Menor was getting legal status. So I mean,
this was a place that this is a wetland, isn't it? That had the same status as a person.
Yeah. So we do have that as well. I think it also depends, like who acts for nature or who acts for the degraded ecosystems. We do have very strong access for justice provisions. We now have also Environmental Crime Directive, which is very strong now. So I think it depends really where it is needed or not, but the awareness or the ownership idea of I take care. I give you now an example of something very completely different. In France, there's this idea of adopting a river for school classes, which I found is a very, very nice and very good idea, because you create ownership and that you can do and scale up. So giving legal status might be very important in some cases. It's not the only silver bullet.
But it can trigger a series of things which can be positive.
Especially if it is linked to indigenous rights. I think then you also have to see it in that context.
Let's move on to, let's go on to...
The combination of awareness, but also real capacity that is connected to enforcement. I think the opportunity of awareness is that it can be followed up, that it goes beyond, we are aware, but it creates ownership, but also the capacity to do something. And the legal status really gives you the opportunity to say, hey, stop, and work collectively on an alternative. I think that combination is strong.
Let's talk about desalination. It's a bit of a key word when it comes to conversations about water, because it's used in many parts of the world. In Singapore and Dubai, they're doing it a lot, doing a lot of desalination. Here in Europe, in Catalonia, we have it going on at the moment. A lot of the water in Barcelona, if you're going there, is coming from desalination. But also they've got recycling and regeneration of water, where they're pumping it back upstream and then taking it back out again. Are those appropriate solutions, considering that we've got climate change coming? We know that even here you can have a drought where it seems to rain all of the time. It can still happen. Henk, is desalination something that should be part of our playbook when it comes to dealing with water problems?
Yes, and there's a reason for that. We have to look back and ahead. If we look back at the early days of desal, we see plants that use up massive amounts of energy that also heat up the water. There's a lot of stuff we take out of the water. Desalination is a little bit of a cover-up word, because it's not only salt you take out, you take everything out. So the water that ends up, you have to put in nutrients back in that are actually good for you. And that brine, that leftover, we throw back into the oceans, and that was very hot, so it's only heating up. So it creates, and then people say we do a large outfall pipe, but you create underwater graveyards with it. So this is the frame where we come from. Right now with technology, what we see is that energy costs go down at large. The brine is different. We can help reuse. There's parts where we can use it for, in the context of desal and agriculture, you can actually use it again as fertilizer. So there are massive opportunity, but it starts with the question where and why. If I'm in an arid region around the world where there's no water around, desalination in a very sustainable and innovative way is part of the solution. If I'm on a small island state and my freshwater bulb is becoming saline and there's no water around, I need it for my survival. But if you, for instance, here in Europe or in Chennai, where there are alternatives in reducing your water use, restoring your natural capital, restoring your cycle of water use sustainably, then that alternative for desal is not the good alternative, because it will increase incentives that are more negative for that society and economy, and won't decrease the water use. It's only adding to your budget, to your environmental cost, and actually not presenting a solution. So it's a suite, it's part of our solution box, but you really have to tailor it, and you need the innovations, and you have to make sure that whatever you take out of that water doesn't end up in our environment, so it kills us all.
Arnaud?
No, it's, desal is definitely part of the playbook. Once again, for us, it's the last of the solution, meaning that we need to use it when we have to use it. We have done massive work within Veolia in order to reduce the impact of desalination. You were speaking about electrical consumption. We've reduced it drastically during the last 10 years, improving membrane technology, putting energy recovery device on nothing, recovering as much as we can as energy. And coming up to the brine, we are now monitoring how we can reuse brine, recreate salt with brine, etc., and monitoring the impact of rejecting this brine into the environment. So there have been a huge changes around desalination in the last 10 years. It's become more efficient. We can even power it by renewable energy, so those plans are here. But this is the last of the solutions, because, as you've said, the first topic is about reducing our consumption.
So, reducing, then you
recycling, but once again, reuse. You're still using energy for reuse, so you need to think about how you want to reuse it. For what do you want to reuse it? Do you want to reuse it for irrigation? Do you want to reuse it for industrial purposes? Do you want to reuse it for potable water?
Regenerating it back to the same level that it came in at.
Or reusing it in reintroducing it to the aquifer as well in order to restart the cycle. So there are many solutions in the playbook which can be guided by a global framework, but coming back to that, it's really on the territory that the solution needs to be done. Even in terms of reuse, reusing water is completely part of the solution. But if you are reusing too much water at the outlet of a wastewater treatment plant, this has a huge impact on the river in which you were rejecting your water before. And what's going to happen to the cities which are below you in this system? What's going to happen in terms of concentration of pollution within this river and the biodiversity within the river? So this is really a holistic approach that we need to take. There is a full playbook of solution, and then you need to define clearly what solution fits the problematic the challenges you are facing in your territories. There are many solutions. We can combine them, but in order to give a tailor-made answer to your territories, and a tailor-made answer which is not just technical, but which is also innovative, which is also built up with, in cooperation with the citizen, with the NGOs, so that there is a clear understanding of why you are investing and where it goes, and what is the added value this is bringing in terms of quality of life, in terms of health.
I want to bring in another question, finally, that we've had from a viewer. This is Thibaut Koch, who's a school teacher from Paris, who's asking a very kind of big-scale question, I suppose, but it plays into some of the conversations we've already had. He's asking, do you consider water to be a common good, basically something that sort of should belong to everyone? Florika, what's the point of view on that?
Well, it is a common good. It's also actually a global good. But then if you combine that, that gives different responsibilities. I think when you look at it, clearly water, and I'm sorry, I have to come back also on the freshwater scarcity, which means we will, in one way or another, see more desalination. And therefore, I think we have to go massively in innovation so as to really reduce the harm that it could do or is doing today. So we really have to scale that up, and we do have possibilities in Europe as well on the horizon, Europe. So we should really not think about this is not going to happen. We will, and therefore we better address it in a positive way and in a solution-oriented way. As regards the global good, I mean, everybody thinks water is there, at least in Europe. I mean, in other countries they would not. But here, water has no real price. It's probably the price only what we're paying is for the service, but not for the water itself.
Yeah.
Now, should we therefore
But the context of his question is these big reservoirs being built by agro-industrial organisations in France who are hoarding the water. That's the word that he used when he was talking to me about it.
And that is coming for the question, like, again, I talked about not going always for the trade-offs. Because ultimately, the water, whether you create, we had this also, the aquifers and the groundwater, we just discussed that. I mean, of course, it's a national government decision how to price water, where to bring the water, and also how to distribute the water. But when you look at Europe, you will realize that is also not something that we can just only see in the national context. We have river basins, which are going across borders, transboundary border governance is needed, and we have that in Europe actually quite well. So you cannot, I just say, I do it on my own, it's just a public or national good. So water is really going everywhere, and therefore has no borders. But I think that means, what are the consequences of it? What does it mean for a regulator? What does it mean for the user? What does it mean also on the distribution context? Because ultimately, if you were to say water is a public good, do you have you just talked about rights, right? But then how about the vulnerable? How about those who cannot afford the real price of water?
And you're also saying that prices need to go up, and I'm thinking of people who can't afford to pay.
No, I didn't say necessarily go up, but I said it's pricing is not the current pricing.
But you said we're not paying enough.
Reflecting the real value.
Right.
And that means we are also not going for efficiency first, because we think it's there in abundance. But if people start hearing, you can't shower, you can't wash your car, you can't flower your garden, they start realizing there is a value. It's not about monetizing that we want to monetize resources. But if you don't give it a value, people do not treat it in the way that we want them to be seen.
How do you fix that problem, Arnaud? Can I bring you in on that?
I will react on that and rebound, because last summer I was discussing with a friend, which is the chief operating officer of a big industrial conglomerate in France, and we were speaking about the price of energy. And I was saying, how do you handle the price of energy, and what is the impact on your business? And say, you know what? The energy is not my issue. Water is my issue. Because the energy, we will be able to price it, we will be able to get it. But in fact, when there will be a decision saying that I do not have access to water, then I need to stop my production plan. So really, and water is a bit on-off, I would say, even in terms of pricing. So we need to put that value. Value, does it mean that this is a price that should be supported by a citizen, that should be supported by an industry, by an agriculture? That's, I would say, a governance topic around this common good. Who decides who is paying what and who should be paying what? The polluter pays is the right scheme, I would say. The one which are polluting should be the one paying.
Right.
And how do we put this value, and how do we make the people aware about this value? Really, this is when we speak about reducing consumption, when we speak about that, we've taken as a commitment, an example in Lille. We have a drinking water distribution contract in Lille, and 60 cities around Lille, and we have taken commitment about reducing the water consumption by 10% in the next 9 years. So we are really pushing around that, about cultural changing in order to reduce. There is also a price impact at some point, saying what should we do with the cubic meters during summer, during winter, smart metering. There is a bunch of solutions that needs to be put in place. Price is one of them, but it's not the ultimate one. And once again, we should make sure that we are not putting people away from having access to water, because having access to water is a human right, and that's clear.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
and actually, we're going to have to wrap up now, so just give me some final thoughts as well on that. And also, while you're at it, recommendations for the incoming people who are going to win in the European elections that we've got coming up very soon as well, especially on this topic.
On the common good and the public good, it depends on scale and what you look at the system. But if we look at the hydrological cycle, where our water comes from, water in Europe does not only come from Europe, it comes from across the world. So we transport water across our sky, which is green water, as Florika mentioned, and blue water. So if you look at the hydrological cycle as a global common good, yes. At the public good, you have to regulate it on a national level, and here in the European Union, of course, on the European level. I think that is clear. Protecting it at all levels is going to be of critical importance to make sure that we capture that source that we still have, and the extremes will only become extreme, so we will lose less. And then focusing on nature. And I think we have quite a bit of pushback in the European Union on our natural legislation, and can we increase that ambition in the elections coming up? I think it's going to be of critical importance that water is going to be part. There is no alternative. For energy, we're looking at a suite of opportunities of alternatives. For water, you can't drink sand or anything else. There's only water that we can use. And that water that we have to protect at the source. And
you've got an incoming load of legislators here in Brussels very soon. How do you convince them?
Water is a top priority, as you said, from an industry and economic perspective. Water should not be managed by water people. It should be managed by all. It's the industry,
and you think the economic
it's energy,
argument is the strongest one?
Economic argument, agriculture argument, food security, energy security. Right. If we want to ensure that there's a future for Europe, you better get water right. Otherwise, forget about it. There's no fix for climate if we don't focus on water. There's no fix for biodiversity if we don't get this hydrological cycle in place. There's no fix for our economy unless we get water right. So water, in that sense, that's what I like, working around the world on water. It's a solution space.
Yeah.
Every time you bring water in, you get an amazing group of people, sectors, and public and private, that are willing and able to provide the alternatives. But you need that prioritization. For the next Commission, water should be top of their list.
Florika, you're part of the Commission. What have we got coming up? What are the things that we can look forward to over the next few months or so regarding water? What are the rules that are coming in, decisions that we can expect coming up?
I think Henk said it actually very well already. I mean, we all know that we have resource depletion and we have scarcity of resources. There will be a run on resources. Now, what is the most important resource for all? It's water. So clearly we have to look at water. And we have a very strong legislative body already. So we can fine-tune it, we can upgrade it and tweak it. But I think it starts by awareness, it starts by industry, it starts by the whole user chain that we have to come together. So I think whatever we will do, and I know that many talk about a blue deal, whatever you call it, we need to look at it as a very scarce good, but also the key element for all our economic prosperity, but also for the well-being, also for health, for everything else. So if we have this and look at this holistically and from a systemic point of view, I think then you will see that it is a driver that we have to see in order to beat for the green water, the blue water, to really, how do you say, also protect us against more disasters about biodiversity degradation, pollution. All of that, if you put that together, I think you can already see the path ongoing. Just last word, the banks, industry and banks, they're very much also aware of scarcity of water. What the example that you said about your friend is what we hear all the time. And one has to say, in all fairness, many go into reuse, recycling, reducing consumption, and that we have to basically do for all user groups. And that, unfortunately, if I may say so, it comes almost naturally because it just becomes scarce. So I'm always very optimistic, so I have to say that I think we go for solutions, because that's a good thing. We both, at least were at the World Water Forum last week in Indonesia, and you could really see, even though the world is so divided for the moment, but on water everybody was quite united, because it's such a common challenge. And everybody looked for solutions and also treated it a bit as this global challenge, a global global good. So that gives me a bit of hope that we will also manage it here in Europe.
I'm going to have to end up there because we run out of time. Florika, Henk, Arnaud, thanks very much for being with us on this discussion. It's been fascinating talking to you, and I hope everybody watching there has learnt a little bit about how to wise up about water. And please stay with us on Euronews and Euronews.com for European news. See you soon.
Thank you, Jeremy.